Brian was rushing around, making sure everything was ready for the party. He had a busy day planned for the orphans today. First, they were going to the theater and then to an amusement park. When they got back, the kids would be able to decorate their own Christmas tree and find a present under it the next morning. It was hectic. He had been doing this every Christmas for 15 years now. First, he did it with his father. Now he did it on his own. Why this orphanage in particular? Because Brian once spent 2 years here. If it weren't for the workers, Brian probably wouldn't have gone back to his family. It happened when he was 7. His father, Walter, was a businessman. Business was good, and it was noticed by his competitors, some of which included less law-abiding citizens. At first, they suggested he sell the company. Then the threats came. Despite that, Walter didn't give in. He wasn't a quitter. Even when they started threatening his wife, he soothed her and said it was just psychological pressure, and there would be nothing more than phone calls. However, that's not how it went. She was attacked while walking in the park with Brian. They just wanted to kidnap him and blackmail Walter, but she protected her son so fiercely, they had to escalate. The stab wound she received was fatal. Walter was crushed. He lost his beloved wife and son. He was consumed by guilt. He took the threats too frivolously and didn't protect his family. He spent all his energy and money on finding his son, but to no avail. He lost more hope that his son was alive every day. Brian wound up in an orphanage in a town about 600 miles away from where he was taken. He didn't talk and didn't remember anything from what happened because of shock. It was like his brain blocked it all out. But one day, 2 years later, everyone was decorating the Christmas tree. Brian picked up an orb and looked at it. Suddenly, his memories began flooding back in. He remembered that his mom loved this Christmas ornament. Then he remembered she was gone. He dropped the ball, which fell and shattered. The woman who ran up to him saw that he was pale and shaking. He looked at her with eyes full of horror and despair. He said broken phrases of what came to his head. He needed to be sedated to calm down. The woman and orphanage director took what they heard seriously. They understood that he survived something horrible. The information that they heard was used to conduct some research, and they found his father. When Walter heard he had a phone call from an orphanage, he understood immediately. He got there as fast as he could. He was elated to hug his own son again. It took Brian 2 more years to recover after his psychologically traumatic ordeal. A year later, on Christmas Eve, Brian told his father he wanted to gather toys and take them to that orphanage. He said they had barely anything to play with and wanted to give them his toys. "Of course we will, but you don't have to give yours away. I'll buy everything we need and we'll go," Walter said. Since then, every year, Walter and his son bought a truck full of everything the orphanage needed, from toys and clothes to school supplies, computers, and more. When Brian graduated from college, his father suggested that he become more active in his company to later take his place. Soon after, Brian suggested opening a branch in the town with the orphanage. He had studied the market and presented a business plan. Additionally, Brian decided to also open a restaurant there. His dad liked the idea. He supported his son and said it was all in his hands. He was to go there, find a suitable location, and then lead it himself. Brian rented an apartment. A girl, April, came a few times a week to help around the house. Brian and April spoke a great deal when Brian was home. She was very pretty. Brian found her attractive because she wasn't like the girls he had always had to talk to. Everyone in his private school and university came from rich families or from high society. They were people who had never known hardships or limitations on what they wanted. All the girls looked like Barbie dolls and only cared about themselves and their appearance. April was simpler. She never embellished and said what she thought. She had different life interests. April wasn't stupid either and was well raised. Brian was happy talking to her. He caught himself thinking sometimes that he wanted to get home faster because he knew April was there. Brian was determined to visit several restaurant openings to see how the market looked. He invited April to join him. "Since I've invited you, maybe we can go and pick out a dress for you for the occasion," Brian suggested. "Mr. Brian Miller, I am a simple woman, but believe me, I know what to wear for events like these. Don't worry, I have a suitable dress already," April answered with a smirk. They had several wonderful evenings together. Brian liked one place, but the decor and service implied that either the owner was extremely greedy or he had financial problems. Brian made him an offer and he bought the restaurant. It was a great deal. Brian hired a team of builders to fix up the place, and he planned to return home for a short while to order all the necessary equipment for the new building. Before he left, he invited April to dinner. When Brian liked a girl before, she usually wound up in his bed very quickly. But those relationships were different, and April was different, which made Brian want her even more. When he walked her home, Brian suddenly hugged and kissed her, and she did in return. It was an unforgettable night, and Brian had never felt anything like it before. He promised to be back in a couple of weeks. However, it was actually a couple months. His father had a stroke, and Brian couldn't leave him. He spent all his time helping his father get back on his feet. Thanks to a good hospital and rehab, his father recovered. Brian returned a few months later, but he wasn't alone and came back with his girlfriend, Vanessa. She had been hanging on him for a while and said she wanted to go even though he didn't ask. Vanessa was super hot and a good partner for marriage. Brian remembered April often and mentally compared her to Vanessa. Of course, Vanessa was perfect for the role of a rich businessman's wife. All she was interested in was going to the spa or beauty salon and buying new clothes. It was nice to go out with her, and her appearance and manners were wonderful, but he never felt as warm and cozy with Vanessa like with April. They bought an expensive penthouse. Brian worked at the branch and restaurant, and Vanessa, as usual, spent time on herself. Sometime later, Brian started to understand Vanessa wasn't the person he wanted to spend his life with. When she started a fight because he insisted on spending another Christmas in the orphanage instead of meeting her halfway, he finally realized she wasn't his partner. Brian decided to break up with her. He put his work aside and went home early to talk to her. Imagine his surprise when he found her in bed with another man. It ended with her packing her bags and leaving. Brian felt incredibly relieved. On Christmas Eve, Brian went to check if everything was okay. The children were decorating the tree. He noticed a boy about 4 years old who was doing all he could to hang on to an orb on a branch. "Do you need help?" Brian asked. The boy turned around and Brian froze. He was looking at his exact copy. Brian didn't understand how it was possible. "Who's this boy? What's he doing here? How'd he get here?" Brian said to the workers. "That's my son, and he has nothing to do with you," he heard a woman say. He immediately knew it was April. Brian understood. This was his son from their one night together. He promised to come back, but never even called. She was too proud to call herself. April picked her son up and rushed out. Brian learned from the workers that April came once a week to help out, and she always baked them something delicious for the holidays. Brian didn't know what to say. How could he fix how he treated her? But he knew for sure he could be with his son. She was shocked to see him on her doorstep. He asked to come in, and she allowed it. He brought his son a pile of toys, and when he looked at his mom with burning eyes to ask if it was okay, she nodded. Brian couldn't stop smiling. He unwrapped the boxes with his son and then played with him with all the toys. After lunch, April put him down for a nap. "April, I don't know what to say. I know I'm in the wrong, and I'm not asking for forgiveness, but please, give me a chance to fix it. I'm begging you." "Are you sure you want this?" she asked with tears in her eyes. She still loved him. "I've never been so sure about anything in my life," Brian answered. "Then you can talk to him as much as you want." "But I want more." April looked scared. "You don't want to take him from me?" No, I want us to be a family. If you're just doing it for him, don't. It's not just for him. I need you. Brian hugged April tightly. This moment felt right. It felt good. He felt calm. He knew he was where he wanted to be, and with the people who were the most important in the world. I'll catch up on everything I missed, I promise, he said without letting her go. Their son walked in then. He looked at them surprised. Son, Brian is your dad. Do you remember when I told you he left for work? He's back and will be with us now, she told him. Then she looked at Brian, smiled, and said, I agree.